In BC, some of the fog has cleared surrounding the abrupt and mysterious suspensions of two top officials within the provincial legislature. The Speaker of the House has released a bombshell report accusing the clerk and the sergeant-at-arms of gross overspending, accusations the two vehemently deny.
I have no idea, and I think the Sergeant-at-Arms is equally shocked.
On November 20th, BC Clerk Craig James and Sergeant-at-Arms Gary Lenz were escorted out of the legislature, suddenly and with little explanation. They were told that they were under criminal investigation.
Let the process continue. Let the investigation take place.
I am left in the position of not being able to respond because no one has told me what the allegations are.
It was then revealed the two had been under the microscope since last January. House Speaker Darryl Plecas hired a special advisor, Alan Mullen, to investigate allegations against the two men. And what he gathered, he passed on to the RCMP. What did they allegedly do? Finally, the Speaker released a 76-page report yesterday with the details. It accuses James and Lenz of, among other things, fraudulent and flagrant overspending, lavish overseas trips, inappropriate expense claims, cash payouts, and misappropriating liquor from the legislature. For more on this report and how it's being received in BC, the CBC's Renee Filippone joins us from Vancouver. Hey, Renee, nice to see you again. Thanks for your time. Tell us, let's go through some of the allegations, I guess, getting a lot of attention that surfaced through this report.
Absolutely. The Speaker's office basically urged British Columbians to take a look at the report and go through it. And it is a very detailed 76-page report. And you went through some of the broad brush strokes of what the allegations are. And again, these are just allegations. They haven't been proven in court, and the two individuals, continue to maintain their innocence in this. But a couple of highlights, as you mentioned, a luxury travel to a bunch of destinations and expensing things like watches, chocolate bars, gunpowder muster are on their expense claims. Vacation payouts we're hearing about as well, taking cash instead of the vacations, but Plecas basically alleges that they then still took those vacations anyway. $5,000 worth of online subscriptions. But the one thing that seems to be getting a lot of attention today is this wood splitter. And you can take a look at a picture of this wood splitter. It is now back on the grounds of the legislature. It's unclear when it ended up back at the legislature, but the allegations are the $3,200 wood splitter was ordered by James. It was actually delivered directly to his house and not the legislature. He claims it would be used in case a tree fell down there and they could split it and use it by firewood. For firewood, that's something that sort of Plecas just isn't buying. Now, through all this, again, yesterday afternoon, we did get a statement from James and Plecas, and I'll read you, James and Lenz, and I'll read you a bit of that. They say that no one shared with them, no one told us what we were being accused of, and no one gave us a chance to respond. That is before this report came out. To allow the release of unsubstantiated and hearsay allegations is simply wrong, and that, quote, we are confident that time will show that they are completely false and untrue.
And how far back, Renee, do the allegations in this go? I know there's been a lot of discussion around the other speakers who might have signed off on expenses, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I asked, the Mullen, the spokesperson for Plecas, was asked sort of point blank yesterday, is this a bigger issue sort of when it comes to the culture of the legislative offices, or is this a specific problem to these two individuals? And he said sort of a bit of column A and a bit of column B. Now, Plecas has been in that position since September 2017. And according to him and his office, as soon as he got that job, he started to notice things just weren't sitting right with him. And that's when he started to launch all of these investigations. Now, in the report, it does reference things going back to 2012, 2013, when you talk about that truckload of alcohol. Now, we know there have been investigations into spending, and the legislative office itself actually doesn't fall under sort of any FOI process like an MLA or a cabinet minister has. So there have been concerns in the past about previous speakers as well as just the legislative offices. And that's something that Green Party leader Andrew Weaver referred to in a press conference he held this morning. So have a listen.
These actions were allowed to go on for an extended period of time with documented efforts to conceal what was happening. We have reported instances of people having their contracts terminated for trying to raise concerns about these practices. We have allegations that documentation which raised concern disappeared from the previous speaker's vault. These were only made public because somebody was willing to come forward with a personal copy that was kept.
Now, we heard through all this from Plecas back in December that he said, wait till you hear about these allegations. They will make British Columbians want to puke when they actually see what he believes is going on. And, that's sort of the response that we've been getting out here online and from British Columbians about these details. Again, none of these are proven right now, but it is a very detailed account. And a lot of people sort of now who were criticizing Plecas for the action that was taken with these two sort of escorted out of the legislature. It's now a bit of vindication for him, and people are saying because he came to this job as an outsider, someone who was tossed from the Liberal Party for taking on the position and didn't have a lot of history within the legislature, that it's because he was an outsider that he was able to walk in and sort of see the situation differently than any of the people in those sort of positions have in the past.
All right, thank you, Renee Filipponi, for us in Vancouver. So why was there so much secrecy around the investigation at the beginning, and what happens now? Alan Mullen is a special advisor to BC's Speaker of the House, and he joins us from Victoria. Hi, Mr. Mullen. Nice to see you. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure, Vashi. Nice to be here.
I appreciate you joining us to answer questions on this investigation. The report at hand, though, was authored by the Speaker. Why is the Speaker not answering questions about it?
Well, I mean, traditionally the Speaker, in his or her role, generally doesn't do press scrums or speak to the media. Usually they do have a media person to do so. Because I've been involved with this process, from the start, we felt it appropriate that all media would go through my office as opposed to his. And
just so I can be clear for our audience, what exactly is your role? Did you conduct the investigation personally?
I did most of it. I mean, it's been called an investigation, for lack of a better word. It was more, gathering information, gathering evidence as it came to us. A lot of concerns were brought to the Speaker and to myself over time. We had to do our due diligence. I think everybody would agree that it would be prudent to do that due diligence prior to bringing anything forward. So it's been called an investigation, for lack of a better word. But yes, I was extremely involved in that process.
When you say those concerns were brought forward to you, who brought them?
Well, initially the Speaker himself brought them. He was witness to a number of items that are referenced in the report that was released yesterday, whether it be when he was on trips, seeing various expense items, but also requests made by the clerk and/or Sergeant-at-Arms to the Speaker for individual benefits that the Speaker felt highly inappropriate at best.
Did he, it's my understanding that he did sign off on some of those expenses, for example, that he now ascertains are questionable. Does the Speaker have any regrets about his action in any of that?
Well, to say that he signed off on some of the expenses is accurate. The issue is some of the expenses that he signed off on, there's a form that goes on the expenses that he is signing off and giving approval. That form was then taken and put on other expenses as well. So it's not clear at this point how much of those expenses were signed off on by the Speaker and how much were simply given that generic sign-off that the Speaker had signed.
Did he sign off, I guess, on anything, though, that at the time he found questionable?
He signed off on a retirement allowance and rescinded it very soon thereafter. He put thought to it, he sought counsel on it, he and I spoke about it and deemed it to be absolutely inappropriate and rescinded it in writing.
On a sort of wider scale, why was it okay to reveal these allegations or conclusions drawn yesterday and not a few months ago when all of this began?
Well, I mean, I think we so had to be on the side of right here. We couldn't just arbitrarily, throw mud at somebody. We needed to make sure, we needed to have the evidence and the documentation. We certainly couldn't release it back in November. We had to work closely with police and with special prosecutors who have been assigned to the case to ensure that we weren't doing anything at all to thwart a police investigation, while we were very cognizant that the general public and British Columbians and Canadians needed to know. So we were walking that fine line of gathering that information, but we also didn't want to release this report without the opportunity to also release the binder that we did release with subsequent documentation, proof, evidence, backing up what the claims are in this report.
If you were worried in part, though, about thwarting a police investigation in November, could you not have thwarted that investigation now with these revelations?
Well, no, because we have spent the time since November working closely with police to ensure that we omitted certain items from the report that they felt would affect their investigation. We have removed some items so the police can do their work, unfettered by our report. That took a lot of time. We needed to make sure that we could give as much information to British Columbians as possible. I think we've done that in this 76-page report, but we needed to take that time since November to make sure, first and foremost, any sort of a criminal investigation was protected.
So just to be clear, everything that was removed from the report that people don't know about yet would involve criminal allegations?
That's what the police are working on.
And any timeline indicated to the Speaker's office at all about how long that investigation might take?
I do know the RCMP are working diligently on it on a daily basis. They've got a number of members assigned to it. We're hopeful that within 4 to 6 weeks we will hear some more information from the RCMP. I certainly wouldn't want to put sort of too stringent timelines on them as their investigation. They will go where the evidence leads them, of course. We're hopeful that we will hear something from them in the next 4 to 6 weeks.
I know you said since November that your office has been gathering evidence and sort of, dotting your I's, crossing your T's prior to making this information public. But from the perspective of the clerk and the sergeant at arms, they say that they were not made aware of any of these allegations. In fact, they say prior to the release of these allegations this afternoon, referring to yesterday, no one shared them with us. No one told us what we're being accused of, and no one gave us any chance to respond. We're only now able to read the allegations for the first time, and we are confident this time will show that they are completely false and untrue. Do you think, on the face of it, it's fair to these two individuals? And I get the allegation. I mean, what's revealed in this report is certainly egregious, and I'm sure a lot of people in BC, read the allegations kind of with their jaw dropped. But the idea that two people can be, removed from their position, escorted out in the fashion they were, and never told what they're accused of, does that sound fair to you?
Well, on the face of it, no, it doesn't. But I would describe it more as an unfortunate situation, given the position these two individuals hold. They had to be escorted out in the fashion they were. It had to take place in the fashion it did. It had to go to a vote of the Legislative Assembly. That had to happen when the House was sitting. We could not give anybody any of this information, and unfortunately, those two individuals as well.
Why, though? Why? If they're accused, if their jobs are, jeopardized, I know they were suspended with pay, but, if you're arrested by the police, you're told you're facing a charge of assault or, whatever it may be. Couldn't they have at least been told that information?
Well, I mean, again, that's for the Legislative Assembly and ultimately what we call LAMC, the Legislative Assembly Management Committee, to decide. On the 20th of November, the information that we presented to the House leaders, they felt it enough to present to their individual caucuses. Those 86 members felt it enough to unanimously vote on a motion to place them on administrative leave with pay, pending an investigation. That's why it was administrative leave with pay pending that investigation. Since then, we couldn't release information to anybody, again, until we could clearly separate the criminal from the information pertaining in the report. And we couldn't release that publicly until LAMC, the Legislative Assembly Management Committee, given the information, given these two individuals' positions, LAMC had to vote on that, and that was one of the 4 motions voted on by LAMC yesterday to release the report 100% to the public unvetted. We couldn't release that to Mr. James or Mr. Lenz or anybody of the public for that matter until LAMC, as the Management Committee, as the oversight, made that motion and voted unanimously.
Okay, I have to leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Vashi.
Time for the Power Panel. In Calgary, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Stockwell Day, alongside Marcella Monroe of KTG Public Affairs. In Toronto, Supriya Dwivedi, host of Global News Radio's Toronto 640 AM show. And here with me in studio, the CBC's Evan Dyer. Hi, everyone. So this story is wild. I feel like there are so many aspects to it, but let's start with the nature of the allegations. Supriya, how serious do you think they are from what we've gathered so far? And I'll preface that by saying that Mr. Mullen told us that they had removed the ones of a criminal nature, and the RCMP is dealing with those.
Yeah, well, look, they're certainly not good, right? But I think just the drama surrounding how this all unfolded, neither of them really knew what the allegations even were. This being the times that they are, I think a lot of people honestly assumed worse. So the fact that this is just a run-of-the-mill spending story is in some ways good for them, and in other ways incredibly terrible once you start to dig into some of the details. And I mean, CBC ran a great piece where it highlighted the 8 most wild and ridiculous things about this. My personal favorite is not knowing that your mouse just needs new batteries and you instead run up like an Apple Genius charge for it. But I think the other thing that compounds all of this is that 95 or 96% of Canadians wouldn't even really be able to tell you what a clerk or a sergeant-at-arms really does. And not that civic illiteracy really excuses us in this, but at least when it's a politician or let's say a governor general who's perhaps being quite loose with the public purse strings, people at least know what their role is and what they do. And in this situation, it's kind of like, well, why do you need a wood splitter or wood chipper or whatever it was? Why exactly do you need these really expensive suits as your uniform, even though you don't really wear suits as your uniform? And the questions really start to snowball and pile up.
And it is interesting, though, Stockwell, that what we've heard so far from the 2 people accused is that this is the first that they've learned even of those accusations. They were not told, and I asked Mr. Mullen about it, like, when you accused them of it or when you suspended them, why didn't you say, even in general terms, what they were accused of? Do you think that sort of compounds things as well?
I think it does. That's a good point. And some of these things, we can chuckle at. They talk about splitting hairs about finances, and here we're talking about splitting wood. But actually, it's pretty serious because, as many people, and you can't expect people to be aware, but the clerk of any assembly, and including the House of Commons, and the sergeant-at-arms, those are the 2 most respected positions in terms of people in the assembly itself, the 2 most trusted. And that's going to cause some real concerns that at this level, this kind of expense could get by them. Here's another interesting wrinkle. Speaker Plecas, as you recall, in the last election, when the Liberals provincially needed every seat they could get, they all promised that they would not take on the seat of Speaker. And in a last moment, what's seen as an extreme betrayal, Plecas accepted that seat, thereby taking away 1 vote in a very tight legislative assembly. So now there's a recall going on in his constituency, people upset that he broke his word. And here's the wrinkle, he's supposed to be the final sign-off. So he's going to get asked, I think, some serious and appropriate question. How did you sign off these amounts? If you say, well, I didn't really, look at it that closely, it's going to hit him that way too. So there's some interesting ramifications all around here.
Yeah, what do you think about the political ramifications, Marcella? We heard Andrew Weaver, for example, the leader of the Green Party today, talking about how this appears to have been going on for a while and could speak to the culture there. There is an audit being done of everything that sort of has gone down, all the kinds of expenses and that sort of thing. What do you think the possible implications are?
Well, first one's just our normal Canadian, U.S. politics is so crazy, BC politics, hold my beer, because that's what BC politics does so well. Look, I think there's a number of problems this draws some pretty stark attention to. One of them is that, of course, given the nature of these offices, and traditionally, you can't FOI the expenses for these offices. And so, would there have been a better public service if we could have found out about this a long time ago? We also know that in terms of what Speaker Plecas and his office has put together. So far, it's 18 months, I think. It's not, so presumably this audit will look further back than that, and there may be more to this. One of the most shocking things from my view, lots of it's funny, but this idea that Craig James, the clerk, received a $250,000 retirement payout based on, by the way, policy that's 25 years ago canceled. 25 years before he got that payout canceled. So now you have another layer of questions, which is why would former BC Liberal Speaker Bill Barasoff have agreed to that? And we don't know, because the allegation is there was a report looking at it and saying it was problematic that then BC Liberal Speaker Linda Reid didn't release. So there's lots here to chew on. I think the bottom line is, does it have big P political ramifications? We don't know. There's a by-election going on, maybe. But the bottom line is all members of that place, of the House, are responsible for this budget, and I think it's a black eye for the people of British Columbia once again to look at politics and say, here's some more things going on with our tax dollars that we don't like, and I think that's sort of sad for the whole system.
Evan, do you think there are sort of big P political implications?
Well, I do find it interesting if we believe the version of Speaker Plecas, who accompanied these two to London and then was shocked to find that they were going to Savile Row tailors and so on. What I find interesting about that is their assumption that he would go along with it. If he's telling the truth, right? It's all allegations at this point. But his suggestion is that they were sort of letting him in on the joke, and that they would even joke when they went to that tailor about buying uniforms for their job, which of course are not business suits. They actually do have a uniform, and that was not what they were buying in London. And then Speaker Plecas says they continued to joke to him about buying other things on their expense account that were part of the uniform, even if they weren't clothing. So what made them think that he would go along with it? Have they had previous experiences where people did go along with it? Or is there something in the culture in the BC Ledge that made them make that assumption? Because obviously he has enough integrity to not go along with it, but is he alone in that? That was one of the things I was wondering. I guess the other thing that strikes me too is that if you talk to people here in Ottawa in the public service, I'm not talking about high-ranking people or certainly not elected people, just ordinary public servants. The expenses today are so complicated, they won't cater anything. And I'm talking coffee and sandwiches. It's just too much paperwork, and I don't know if the public is aware of how many hoops ordinary public servants have to jump through to expense anything. But we forget there are these little islands of privilege still in government where you can expense ridiculous things, or at least believe you're going to get away with expensing a $3,500 wood chopper for your own property. Very different from the average experience of public servants.
Supriya, a final comment to you. What do you think the potential ramifications are for these two individuals? I mean, I'm not really clear on what has to happen now. I know that they said that they'll respond, and officially the committee says I think they have until February 1st to respond. They have insisted that they didn't do this stuff, and I just keep thinking back to different spending scandals in Ottawa where maybe optically it didn't look good, but rules maybe weren't necessarily broken, the law wasn't broken. I know there's sort of a long way to go before we can reach any of those conclusions, but how does this go down, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly hard for me to predict without them having put out a formal response yet. But if I had to guess, if their line right now is that none of this happened whatsoever, has any shred of truth in it, it's going to be kind of hard for them to make that case. I assume that there are receipts to this, both figuratively and literally, in which it can show up that a lot of this stuff did in fact happen. So I'm really not sure how you can claim total innocence the whole way through and not at least couch it with, oh, but I thought we were allowed to do this, as we've seen in other spending issues or scandals. Because I think Evan raises a really good point here as to, well, how long was this really going on for, and what kind of insinuation did the speaker really give to them if they thought he wasn't going to snitch on them?